At 23 years old, leading the league in rebounding and playing to a devoted fan base, Angel Reese was traded by the Chicago Sky for a return that by any standard measure fell far below her market value. In professional sports, trades of this nature rarely reflect only performance. They tend to signal something deeper about the relationship between a player and an organization. Chicago did not arrive at this decision quietly. In September of the previous season, the Sky issued Reese a half-game suspension and formally designated her conduct as detrimental to the team. That phrase carries specific weight in professional sports. It is administrative language, the kind used when a front office is building a documented record, not merely addressing an isolated incident. It suggested the relationship had already deteriorated beyond the point of repair. The internal friction extended to the locker room. Courtney Vanderloot, a five-time All-Star and two-time champion, had spent years helping shape the culture of the franchise. Reports from inside the organization indicated that Reese dismissed her as past her prime, a characterization that did not sit well with teammates or with the broader league. Veteran players throughout the WNBA took notice. The dynamic with Camila Cardoso was also significant. The two had been projected as a long-term frontcourt pairing, but accounts from within the organization described a deteriorating working relationship, with Cardoso distancing herself from interactions and younger players growing uncomfortable with the environment. When a primary frontcourt partnership breaks down internally, the effects extend well beyond the two players involved. Then came an injury absence that raised questions about its timing. While listed as sidelined with a back injury, Reese appeared in social media footage aboard a private jet headed to Las Vegas. The optics were difficult to reconcile with the official account, and for a front office already in the process of documenting conduct issues, the incident appeared to confirm what they had already concluded. Chicago ultimately chose Cardoso, a younger center with range and a profile better suited to the modern spacing game, over Reese. The trade return was minimal. That outcome alone communicates the state of the relationship at the time of the deal. Reese has since moved to Atlanta, where the roster presents immediate structural questions. The Dream already have Brittany Griner and Brianna Jones, two physical, paint-dependent forwards who do not function as floor spacers. Adding Reese, whose shooting range remains limited and whose offensive game relies heavily on second-chance opportunities, makes the frontcourt congestion difficult to resolve tactically. Three non-shooting bigs competing for paint space leaves the perimeter open and restricts offensive movement. That creates matchup problems in games against teams like the Indiana Fever. Indiana's system is built around pace and floor spacing, and Caitlin Clark's effectiveness in pick-and-roll situations forces opposing bigs into a difficult choice: stay back and concede the three-point shot, or step out and risk losing the drive. Atlanta's frontcourt, as currently constituted, is ill-suited to manage either option efficiently. The Fever have also added depth around Clark, Aaliyah Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, and a supporting cast that punishes slow-rotating defenses, making the matchup increasingly unfavorable for Atlanta. Reports also indicated that Reese told people in her circle that she was worth more than the entire Chicago franchise. Whether or not those accounts are accurate, they reflect a perception that had taken hold within the organization, one that factored into the calculus of a trade that returned almost nothing. Chicago fans who followed 2 seasons of these developments have expressed little ambivalence about the outcome. They observed a player whose statistical contributions, particularly in rebounding, did not consistently translate into winning, and whose presence generated ongoing organizational instability. Reese's jersey is selling in Atlanta, though the supply appears to have been kept deliberately limited. Jersey sales, however, do not address the defensive and spacing vulnerabilities her signing creates. The WNBA has been moving toward a faster, more system-oriented style of play. Roster construction increasingly depends on positional flexibility, shooting range, and locker room cohesion. Against that backdrop, Chicago's trade, whatever its financial return, removed a source of documented internal disruption while retaining a player, Cardoso, better positioned for the direction the league is heading. Whether Atlanta can integrate Reese productively, resolve the spacing issues in their front court, and avoid the instability that characterized her time in Chicago, remains the central question heading into the 2026 season. The circumstances that preceded this trade do not disappear with a change of address. They travel. What the trade return actually represents requires some additional context. Chicago received Atlanta's first-round picks in 2027 and 2028, along with the right to swap second-round picks in the 2028 draft. That is a meaningful haul for a franchise that announced, through the official language of its trade statement, that it was seeking roster balance. 2 first-round picks across consecutive drafts give Chicago real currency to rebuild. Whether that rebuild produces anything depends entirely on how the Sky used those selections, but the organizational calculus was clearly that future flexibility outweighed present production. Under the WNBA's new collective bargaining agreement, Reese's base salary for the 2026 season will increase from roughly $75,000 to approximately $350,692. That figure is still well below market rate for a player of her statistical profile, and it represents one of the more underappreciated dimensions of this deal. Atlanta acquired a 2-time All-Star at a salary that consumes roughly 5% of the league's new $7 million cap. That leaves room to address other roster needs during what remains an active free agency period. The financial element also clarifies something about Chicago's motivations that the trade return alone does not fully explain. This was in part a salary decision as much as a personnel one. Chicago had the 7th highest player payroll in the league last season. Parting with Reese while also acquiring draft capital resolves 2 problems simultaneously: the payroll and the internal instability in a single transaction. For Atlanta, the financial picture is also relevant to how head coach Karl Smesko and general manager Dan Padover structure the rest of the offseason. With cap space, a defined system, and a strong returning core, the remaining roster decisions, specifically at the wing positions vacated by free agency attrition, will determine whether the supporting cast is sufficient to compete with the league's top tier. The Dream's 2025 season provides an important baseline for evaluating what Reese is joining. Atlanta finished with a franchise-best 30 wins and a .682 winning percentage, improving from last in offensive rating in 2024 to second in 2025. That transformation was not accidental. Smesko's system emphasizes pace, ball movement, and three-point shooting. Atlanta ranked near the top of the league in offensive rating, defensive rating, and net rating. Multiple players posted career-best seasons under his direction. Alicia Gray finished 4th in MVP voting. Ryan Howard became the fastest player in WNBA history to reach 300 career three-pointers. Naz Hillman earned 6th Player of the Year honors, and Brianna Jones earned All-Star recognition while doubling her career total of double-doubles. That context matters because it reframes the concern about front-court congestion. Smesko did not arrive in Atlanta with an orthodox big-man system. When he was hired, there were questions about how his pace-and-space approach would mesh with a roster that already included both Brianna Jones and Brittany Griner in the front court. He found sufficient balance between perimeter-oriented play and utilizing his bigs, and managed to build a consistent defense in the process. The question is not simply whether 3 interior players can coexist in principle, it is whether Smesko can manage their minutes and roles in a way that preserves the spacing and pace that made Atlanta's offense the 2nd most efficient in the league last year. Reese's rebounding profile is genuinely additive within that framework, even if her shooting range is not. Her ability to keep possessions alive on the offensive end and generate second-chance opportunities creates more starting points for transition offense. In a system that already ran efficiently without her, those extra possessions compound. Whether her defensive responsibilities in Smesko's scheme require her to cover ground she has historically struggled with remains the more pressing tactical concern. The broader championship picture heading into May does not position Atlanta among the clear favorites. Following the Reese acquisition, the Dream's title odds moved from 18-1 to roughly plus 900, an improvement that still leaves them outside the realm of the genuine contenders. The reigning champion Las Vegas Aces lead the board, with the Indiana Fever close behind, followed by the Minnesota Lynx and the New York Liberty. Atlanta's movement reflects real optimism about the roster, but the gap between a top 5 team and a championship contender in the WNBA's current competitive landscape is substantial. Indiana's position in that hierarchy carries particular relevance for Atlanta, given the team's scheduled matchups. The Dream's 2026 slate includes 4 games against the Fever, twice in a 3-day span in June. Those contests will serve as early stress tests for how Reese integrates into Smesko's system under pressure from one of the league's most tactically demanding offenses. Clark was limited to 13 games in 2025 due to a recurring groin injury, but averaged 16.5 points and 8.8 assists in that time. Reports heading into 2026 indicate she is fully healthy. The Fever retain both Clark and Aaliyah Boston under contract. giving them a foundation that most organizations in the league would consider championship caliber. Indiana made it within a game of the WNBA Finals in 2025, despite being depleted by injuries throughout the season. The implication of a full Clark season with a rebuilt supporting cast around her in Boston is straightforward. For Atlanta, that matchup arrives early in the schedule and repeats before June ends. The Dream will not have the luxury of an extended adjustment period. Reese will be expected to function within Smesko's system from the first week of the regular season, and the games against Indiana in late spring and early June will provide the clearest early measurement of whether the integration is working. There is also a less quantifiable dimension to this transition worth acknowledging. The relationship between Reese and Chicago deteriorated in part when her trusted head coach Teresa Weatherspoon was fired after just one season. Reese was publicly disappointed about that decision, and it was one of the first significant fractures in her relationship with the franchise. In Atlanta, Smesko enters his second year with the same front office that hired him, and the same core of players he developed last season. That continuity is not a minor variable. Players who have operated in fractured organizational environments often perform differently when the structure around them is consistent. It is also worth noting that Reese did not request this trade. The Sky worked with her representation to find a new team, and there was no public dispute between the parties at the time the deal was completed. A player who arrives without having forced her way out carries a different posture than one who demanded a move. Whether the reported internal conflicts of the past two seasons were as one-sided as the prevailing narrative suggested, or whether organizational dysfunction at the institutional level was also a contributing factor, is a question the public record does not fully resolve. What it does resolve is this: the Chicago Sky entering a rebuild with 2 first-round picks and a younger frontcourt centerpiece in Camila Cardoso have made their assessment clear. The Atlanta Dream, building on a franchise record season with a coach whose system produced measurable results in his first year, have made an equally clear statement about where they believe this player fits. Both organizations have committed to a direction. The 2026 season will begin to show which of them read the situation correctly. Atlanta opens the regular season on the road against the Minnesota Lynx before hosting the defending champion Las Vegas Aces on May 17. By the time those early games conclude, a clearer picture will have begun to form of Reese's fit within Smesko's offense, of the Dream's realistic ceiling, and of whether the circumstances that defined her 2 years in Chicago follow her south or remain behind. The players who will define Atlanta's supporting cast around Reese, Griner, and Jones are still taking shape. The Dream's offseason activity at the wing positions will carry more weight than any single trade or signing. Last season, Atlanta benefited from elite wing play, Howard and Gray operating in complementary roles that gave Smesko the floor spacing his system requires. If either of those roles diminishes in quality through free agency attrition, the spacing concerns around the front court become harder to manage regardless of how effectively Reese adapts. Howard's development curve is one of the more under-examined storylines entering 2026. She arrived in the league as a scorer and has steadily expanded her playmaking responsibilities under Smesko's guidance. Her three-point volume and efficiency give Atlanta a perimeter anchor that can pull opposing bigs away from the paint, exactly the kind of player whose presence makes a Reese acquisition more tactically viable. When the floor is spaced by shooters of Howard's caliber, the paint opens. When it isn't, the congestion becomes structural rather than incidental. Gray's situation is slightly more complicated. She earned significant recognition in 2025 and enters 2026 with elevated expectations and a contract reflecting that standing. Whether her role evolves or whether the addition of Reese shifts some of her usage is a question Smesko will need to manage carefully. Veteran players who have adjusted to expanded roles do not always adapt cleanly when a new addition alters the distribution of touches and minutes. Chicago's experience with locker room dynamics is a useful reference point here, though Atlanta's organizational environment is considerably more stable. Reese's relationship with Griner will be one of the more closely watched subplots of the early season. Griner has played through roster upheaval before. She has operated in systems with multiple frontcourt pieces and found ways to remain effective, but her presence requires real spacing around her, and her most efficient stretches have come when the perimeter around her was occupied by genuine shooting threats. If Smesko staggers the minutes between Griner, Jones, and Reese effectively, the overlap becomes less of a structural liability. If the minutes stack, the paint will be crowded in ways that limit all three. There is also a mental dimension to Reese's situation that deserves consideration beyond the tactical. She is 23 years old, playing for her second organization, and carrying a public narrative that has not always been charitable to her complexity as a competitor. Young players in high-profile environments absorb narratives whether they choose to or not. The organizational continuity in Atlanta, Smesko's stability, the established chemistry among the returning core, may provide enough structure for Reese to redirect her energy toward the things she does at an elite level, pursuing the ball relentlessly, commanding the glass on both ends, and manufacturing extra possessions out of defensive miscommunication. If that version of Reese shows up, the one who leads the league in rebounding and plays within a coherent team structure, Atlanta will be a harder team to dismiss heading into the postseason. The raw material is there. Whether the environment in Atlanta is genuinely different from Chicago, or simply different in ways that have not yet been tested, is what the 2026 season will actually measure.